The old woman smelled like rain and sewage. Mud dripped from the hem of her torn dress onto the polished marble floor of Pisani Holdings, leaving dirty footprints that made executives wrinkle their noses. "Someone get security," one manager sneered. "This isn't a homeless shelter." Laughter rippled through the lobby. Receptionists looked away. Employees pretended to be busy. No one wanted to be seen helping the filthy old stranger. Except one woman. A plus-sized junior bookkeeper quietly stepped away from her desk, removed her own blazer, and gently wrapped it around the trembling woman's shoulders. "It's okay," she whispered with a warm smile. "Let's get you cleaned up." The old woman's eyes filled with tears. "You remind me of my son," she said softly. Shirley Curry chuckled. "I hope he's kinder than the people in this building." She had no idea the entire lobby had suddenly fallen silent, because every security guard had just recognized the elderly woman. She wasn't homeless. She wasn't lost. She was Evelina Pisani, the fiercely protected mother of the most feared mafia boss in America. And at that exact moment, 30 floors above them, Viviano Pisani stood frozen inside his office, watching the security cameras. He wasn't looking at his mother. He already knew she'd escaped the care estate again. No, his eyes never left the young woman kneeling beside her. Because for the first time in years, someone had helped his mother, without knowing who she was. What Shirley didn't know was that one act of kindness had just changed her life forever. Because within 48 hours, she would uncover a financial secret capable of destroying Viviano's entire empire. And the very people laughing at the old woman today would soon be willing to kill to keep that secret buried. Before we rewind to the moment Evelina walked through those doors covered in mud, if you believe how someone treats a stranger who can do nothing for them, says everything about their character, hit subscribe, because Shirley Curry is about to prove that in a way none of those laughing executives will ever forget. And tell me in the comments, have you ever watched someone dismiss a person because they judged them by appearance alone, only to find out later exactly who that person really was? Also, drop where you're watching from tonight. I love seeing how far this story travels. Type "kindness wins" below if you already know exactly whose side you're on. Now, let's go back to a rainy afternoon in Central Park, before anyone at Pisani Holdings knew what was about to walk through their front doors. Evelina Pisani had counted 11 gray days since anyone at Rosewood Estate had let her feel the rain on her own skin. Not the manicured drizzle of the estate's private garden, carefully monitored by staff who hovered close enough to catch her if her balance faltered. Real rain. Unscheduled, unsupervised, entirely her own to walk through. She'd slipped past the afternoon nursing shift change the way she always did, a skill she privately suspected would have made her an excellent thief in another life, out through the garden's side gate, before anyone thought to check her room. Central Park welcomed her with wet gravel paths and the particular gray light she'd always loved best, the kind that made the whole city look like an old photograph. She walked for nearly an hour, unbothered, unwatched, simply a woman among other women, invisible in the best possible way. Then she saw the old man. His shopping cart had tipped near a muddy embankment beside the pond, cans and bread rolling free into the wet grass, his hands too unsteady to gather them quickly enough before the rain soaked everything through. Evelina didn't think. She simply moved to help, the way she'd have helped anyone, once, before dementia and diagnosis and a son's protective love had slowly narrowed her world down to a single guarded estate. Her foot slid on the embankment's wet slope. She went down hard, mud swallowing her dress to the elbow, her palms scraping raw against buried gravel. The old man apologized profusely, tried to help her up, but Evelina waved him off, embarrassed, insisting she was fine even as her hands trembled. She refused the concerned jogger who offered to call someone. She refused the park ranger who suggested a bench and a phone call to whoever might be looking for her. She simply kept walking, mud drying stiff against her torn sleeves, disoriented now in a way she recognized with quiet, familiar dread. The fog that sometimes rolled in without warning, stealing names and directions and certainty all at once. She knew only one thing clearly. Her son's office. If she could just find her son's office, everything would be all right. 3 hours later, soaked and shaking, Evelina pushed through the revolving doors of Pisani Holdings into a lobby of gleaming marble and hushed, expensive quiet. The reception desk fell silent as she approached. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. This is a private building. I need to see my son." Evelina's voice wavered, mud-streaked hands gripping the desk's polished edge. "Viviano, he works here. Please, I just need—" "Someone get security." A man in a tailored suit wrinkled his nose from several feet away, phone still pressed to his ear. "This isn't a homeless shelter." Laughter rippled across the lobby, quiet at first, then bolder, executives exchanging glances over their coffee cups, a cluster of women near the elevator bank giggling behind manicured hands. "Look at the state of her. Probably wandered in off the street. Someone should really call the shelter downtown." Evelina's eyes filled, mortification and confusion tangling together as the fog pressed harder against her thoughts, her son's name suddenly further away than it had been a moment before. No one moved to help. Receptionists busied themselves with paperwork that didn't need doing. Employees crossing the lobby found urgent reasons to look at their phones, their shoes, anywhere but the trembling old woman leaning against the reception desk. Shirley Curry saw all of it from her small desk near the accounting department's glass wall. She didn't think about it either. The way, she'd later realize, neither had Evelina, an hour and a mile ago, reaching for a stranger's spilled groceries. She rose, crossed the lobby in quick, purposeful strides, and knelt beside the old woman without a flicker of the hesitation everyone else in the room had shown so freely. "Hi there." Shirley kept her voice gentle, unhurried, the way she'd once learned to speak to her own grandmother during her final confused months. "I'm Shirley. Can I get you some water?" Evelina's eyes found her, wet and grateful and frightened all at once. "I just need my son. We'll figure that out together, okay? First, let's get you somewhere warm." Shirley slid out of her blazer without a second's pause, wrapping it gently around the old woman's shaking shoulders, ignoring the mud that immediately transferred onto the fabric. "There. Better? You're going to ruin your jacket. It's a jacket. You're a person. I know which one matters more." Shirley offered a small, warm smile, taking the old woman's cold, trembling hands between her own and gently wiping mud from her knuckles with a tissue from her pocket. "Everyone deserves kindness. Come sit with me." Evelina's breath caught, tears spilling freely now, though something in her expression had softened considerably. "You remind me of my son," she said softly. Shirley chuckled, guiding her gently toward the lobby's small seating area, entirely unaware of the stares still fixed on them from every direction. "I hope he's kinder than the people in this building." "He is." Evelina's voice trembled with something like pride beneath the confusion. "When he lets himself be." Behind them, a security guard rounding the corner from the executive elevator bank froze mid-stride, his radio slipping slightly in his grip. "That's—" He straightened instantly, his entire posture shifting from casual patrol to urgent alert. "That's Mrs. Pisani." The word rippled backward through the lobby, like a struck match catching dry grass. "Pisani." The laughter died all at once. Executives who'd been sneering moments earlier went pale, exchanging horrified glances, phones lowering slowly from ears that had suddenly stopped caring about whatever call they'd been so urgently attending to. Shirley, still crouched beside Evelina with a tissue in one hand, glanced up in confusion at the sudden, complete silence swallowing the room. "What's going on?" No one answered her. 30 floors above, inside an office of glass and steel overlooking the entire financial district, Viviano Pisani stood frozen before a bank of security monitors, his jaw set, his hand pressed flat against the cool glass, as though he might somehow reach through it. He'd known the moment his mother slipped past Rosewood's side gate. A silent alert triggered the instant her tracker crossed the estate's perimeter, exactly as it always did, exactly as it had a dozen times before. He'd known she would eventually make her way here, the way she always did when the fog rolled in, and confusion sent her searching for the one anchor she trusted absolutely. What he hadn't expected, what made his chest tighten with something unfamiliar and overwhelming as he watched the grainy security feed, was the quiet, unremarkable young woman in a plain office blouse, kneeling on marble beside his mother, while an entire lobby full of powerful, well-dressed people had simply watched and laughed. He didn't recognize her. He intended to change that within the hour. Viviano reached the lobby in under 2 minutes, a personal record he'd have found amusing under any other circumstance. The elevator doors opened onto a scene that had transformed entirely from the one he'd watched on the monitors. The same lobby, the same marble floor, but every trace of laughter had drained away, replaced by a kind of frozen, guilty stillness as executives realized exactly whose mother they'd mocked minutes earlier. Viviano. Evelina's face lit instantly at the sight of him, some of the fog clearing from her eyes as familiarity anchored her. "There you are, I found the nicest young woman. Mama." He crossed the lobby in long strides, kneeling beside her chair, his hands finding hers with a gentleness few people in this building had ever witnessed. "You scared me. You know that, don't you?" Slipping out again. "I wanted to feel the rain." Her voice held no apology, only quiet, stubborn dignity. "A person can go mad locked in a garden forever, Viviano." "I know." His jaw tightened, though whether from fear or guilt, Shirley, still crouched close by, unwilling to abandon the old woman mid-conversation, couldn't quite tell. "We'll talk about it. Not here." His eyes lifted then, finding Shirley's for the first time. Something shifted in his expression, sharp and assessing, though not unkind, the particular focus of a man cataloging every detail at once, filing them away for later. "You're the one who helped her," he said. "It wasn't a question." "I was the closest," Shirley said simply, rising to give them space, though Evelina's hand caught her wrist before she could step back. "Don't run off. I like this one, Viviano." Evelina patted Shirley's hand with surprising strength. "She gave me her jacket. Look, it's ruined now." "It's fine," Shirley said quickly. "Truly, dry cleaning exists." Viviano's gaze dropped to the mud-streaked blazer, draped over his mother's shoulders, and something in his composed expression cracked, just slightly. Gratitude, raw and unpolished, breaking through the careful control he clearly wore like armor. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I don't have adequate words for what you did just now. I didn't do anything remarkable. I just—" Shirley gestured vaguely toward the lobby, toward the executive still hovering at careful, guilty distances. Nobody else was moving. Someone had to. Apparently that logic wasn't shared by half my senior staff. His voice had gone colder, though the anger clearly wasn't directed at her. He glanced toward the manager who'd first called for security, and the man visibly paled beneath his tailored suit. "We'll discuss that separately." "Viviano." Evelina tugged gently at his sleeve. "I'm tired, dear, and I think I'd like a proper bath before anyone else looks at me like I've crawled out of a sewer." "Of course." His expression softened instantly, the ice in his voice replaced by something warmer, more careful. "I'll take you home myself. No estate car, no driver you don't recognize. Just me." "Good." Evelina allowed him to help her stand, though her eyes found Shirley once more before they moved toward the elevator. "You'll visit me sometime, won't you? I'd like to hear more about the young woman who wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty for a stranger." Shirley faltered, glancing toward Viviano, uncertain what appropriate response existed for an invitation from the mother of her employer. "If that's all right." "It's more than all right," Viviano said, before his mother could answer, something quiet and deliberate in his tone that Shirley didn't quite have time to examine before the elevator doors closed around them both. The lobby exhaled the moment they were gone, conversations resuming in hushed, mortified murmurs, executives scattering toward elevators and offices with sudden, urgent purpose. Shirley returned to her desk in the accounting department, aware of curious glances following her the entire way, and had barely settled back into her chair before Gregory Wells appeared in her doorway, his usual charming smile stretched a little too tight. "That was quite a scene downstairs," he said, leaning against her cubicle wall with practiced ease. "Didn't realize you had it in you, Curry. Kneeling in mud for the boss's mother. Very noble. She needed help. It wasn't complicated." "No, I imagine not." Something calculating flickered behind Gregory's smile, gone before Shirley could fully identify it. "Just be careful getting too comfortable up there in the executive circles. People forget their place sometimes, and it never ends well for them." "I don't recall trying to get comfortable anywhere except my own desk, Gregory." "Of course." He straightened, tapping the doorframe twice with 2 fingers, an irritating habit she'd endured for 4 years now. "Speaking of your desk, I need the Hartwell account reconciliation by end of day. And clean it up this time. Mr. Pisani likes clean numbers." He left before she could point out that the Hartwell reconciliation had been clean the first 3 times she'd submitted it, each version subtly altered before it reached upper management with Gregory's name attached to the corrections she'd made. Shirley sighed, turning back to her monitor, and tried to push the entire strange, unsettling afternoon out of her mind. She didn't entirely succeed. 30 floors above, Viviano returned from delivering his mother safely home, settling into his office chair with the particular exhaustion that always followed one of her escapes, relief and worry and love, all tangled together, exhausting in ways violence and business rivals rarely managed to be. Matteo Ricci appeared in his doorway without knocking, as he always did, dropping into the chair across from Viviano's desk with the easy familiarity of 15 years' loyalty. "Heard about the lobby," Matteo said. "Word travels fast in this building." My mother wandered in covered in mud, and half my executive staff laughed at her before someone finally helped. I also heard who that someone was. Matteo's mouth twitched, something almost amused beneath his usual dry composure. Junior bookkeeper, nobody important by all accounts. She was the only person in that entire lobby who acted like a decent human being. Viviano's voice had gone quiet, edged with something Matteo hadn't heard from him in longer than he cared to remember. "I want everything on her. Employment file, performance reviews, anything HR has." "That's an unusual level of interest for a junior bookkeeper, boss." "She's not unusual. That's precisely the point." Viviano's eyes drifted toward the darkened security monitor, still displaying the frozen final frame of Shirley kneeling beside his mother, blazer draped gently around trembling shoulders. "Everyone in this building sees exactly what I want them to see." Matteo, careful, calculated, impressive on paper, his jaw tightened. She didn't perform for anyone. She simply helped, because it needed doing, and she never once looked up to see who was watching. Matteo studied his old friend for a long moment, something knowing settling into his expression. "You're going to make this complicated, aren't you?" "Probably." Viviano's mouth curved, the faintest ghost of an unguarded smile. "Pull her file, Matteo. I want to understand exactly who Shirley Curry is." He didn't yet know that the answer waiting inside her personnel file, 5 years of consistently glowing performance reviews, quietly stripped of credit and buried beneath Gregory Wells's name at every turn, would reveal considerably more than he'd bargained for. Matteo delivered the file himself, 2 mornings later, setting it on Viviano's desk, with the particular quiet that meant he'd already read every page. "You should look at the performance reviews first," he said. "Then the account histories. Then ask yourself why a woman with this record is still sitting in a junior cubicle after 5 years. Viviano opened the folder. 5 years of reviews, each one glowing. Exceptional attention to detail. One supervisor had written 3 years earlier. Consistently identifies discrepancies other analysts miss. Recommend for advancement. The recommendation had never been acted on. He flipped further, and the pattern sharpened with every page. Quarterly reports where Shirley's name appeared in early drafts, then vanished from final submissions, replaced by Gregory Wells's signature on the exact same work. A cost-saving discovery in the Hartwell account, originally flagged in Shirley's handwriting on an internal memo, later presented to the board under Gregory's name with a substantial bonus attached. "He's been taking credit for her work for years," Viviano said quietly. "That's my read too." Matteo settled into the chair across from him. "I pulled a few informal conversations from HR. Bianca Romanos noticed the pattern. Says she's raised it twice with Gregory directly. Nothing ever changes. And Shirley said nothing. Would you, in her position, junior bookkeeper, no family connections, 4 years watching her supervisor build his reputation on her work?" Matteo's voice carried none of its usual dryness. "People like that learn early that complaining costs more than it fixes." Viviano sat with that for a long moment, something cold and deliberate settling behind his eyes. The particular stillness Matteo had learned, over 15 years, meant a decision had already been made. "I want to see her work directly," Viviano said finally. "Not the reports with Gregory's name attached. The raw material, whatever she's currently reviewing." "You're going to walk down to accounting?" "I'm going to review the department's current audit trail, which happens to be my right as CEO." Something almost amused flickered across Viviano's expression. "If that happens to bring me into contact with a junior bookkeeper, I imagine no one will find it particularly strange." Matteo's mouth twitched. "No one except Gregory, possibly. Especially Gregory." Shirley didn't notice him at first. She was 3 hours into reconciling the Meridian account, red pen tucked behind one ear, spreadsheets spread across her desk in a configuration that made sense only to her, when a shadow fell across her monitor and she glanced up to find Viviano Pisani standing at the edge of her cubicle. "Mr. Pisani." She straightened immediately, heart lurching with the particular panic of an employee unexpectedly confronted by the CEO. "Is everything all right? Your mother?" "My mother is home, resting, and already scheming her next escape attempt, if I know her at all." Something warm flickered across his expression before settling back into careful professionalism. "I'm here about work, actually. I'm reviewing current audit processes across the department. May I?" He gestured toward the chair beside her desk, and Shirley, entirely bewildered, nodded. "Of course. Though I should warn you, the Meridian account is not exactly thrilling material. I've read considerably duller things." He settled into the chair, and Shirley became acutely, uncomfortably aware of how close her small cubicle suddenly felt with a man his size, occupying the visitor's seat. "Walk me through what you're finding." She hesitated only a moment before old habit took over, the genuine enthusiasm she usually kept carefully contained, since Gregory had made clear years ago that eagerness read as overstepping. "There's an inconsistency in the vendor payment schedule," she said, sliding a printout toward him. "Small, individually, payments routed through a secondary account before reaching the primary vendor ledger. Could be nothing. Sometimes companies restructure their banking for tax reasons." Her finger traced down a column of figures, "but the timing's strange. Every restructured payment happens within 48 hours of a large incoming transfer from an unrelated account. That's not typical banking behavior. That's closer to a pattern." Viviano studied the printout, then her, something sharpening in his expression that had nothing to do with polite CEO curiosity. "How long have you been tracking this?" "Tracking might be too strong a word. I noticed it about 3 weeks ago, and started keeping informal notes." She flushed slightly. "I haven't flagged it officially yet. I wanted more data points before bringing it to Gregory. He prefers findings to be airtight before they reach his desk." "Does he?" Something flat entered Viviano's voice. And how many of your previous findings has Gregory brought to my desk under his own name? Shirley went very still. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. Viviano's eyes held hers, steady and direct in a way that made her pulse quicken, for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. I've read 5 years of your performance reviews, Miss Curry. I know precisely how many discoveries you've made that later appeared in board presentations with someone else's name attached. Mr. Pisani, Viviano, he said quietly, at least when we're discussing something this direct. Shirley's throat tightened. 5 years of careful, practiced silence, suddenly feeling considerably more fragile than it had that morning. I've never wanted to cause trouble, she said finally. I just wanted to do good work. You have done good work, exceptional work, from everything I've seen. His voice softened. The trouble isn't yours to have caused, Shirley. It belongs entirely to the man who's been taking credit for it. Something in his tone, quiet, certain, entirely without the careful corporate diplomacy she'd have expected, made her chest tighten with an emotion she didn't have time to fully examine before Gregory's voice cut across the department floor. Mr. Pisani! Gregory approached with visible surprise, his usual easy charm sharpening into something more careful the moment he registered exactly which desk his boss had chosen to visit. I wasn't informed you'd be reviewing the department today. It wasn't scheduled. Viviano rose slowly, unhurried, his expression settling back into unreadable professional calm. Miss Curry has been walking me through some interesting findings on the Meridian account. Gregory's eyes flicked toward Shirley, something cold flashing behind his practiced smile before he smoothed it away. Ah, yes, Shirley's diligent, if occasionally overzealous with her theories. He laughed lightly, though the sound didn't quite reach his eyes. I've had to reel in a few of her more creative interpretations before. Wouldn't want to alarm you over what's likely a simple banking restructure. I'd like to see the full documentation myself, Viviano said. By tomorrow morning, if that's manageable. Of course. Gregory's smile didn't waver, though something tightened at the corners. I'll have my team compile everything relevant. I'd prefer Shirley compile it directly, Viviano said, and the department floor around them seemed to go very quiet. Given she's the one who identified the pattern in the first place. Gregory's jaw flexed once, sharp and controlled, before he inclined his head with the careful, practiced grace of a man burying his fury for later. Whatever works best, he said smoothly. I'll leave you to it then. He walked away with measured, unhurried steps, and Shirley watched him go with a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. The particular, familiar dread of a woman who'd learned, over 4 long years, exactly how dangerous Gregory Wells became when he felt cornered. That evening, working late to compile the documentation Viviano had requested, Shirley discovered something that made her blood run cold. The 48-hour transfer pattern she'd flagged wasn't isolated to the Meridian account. It ran through 6 other accounts, stretching back nearly 3 years, funneling money through shell structures with names too generic to mean anything on their own, until she cross-referenced the routing numbers and found every single one traced back to the same authorizing signature, Gregory Wells's. Shirley didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table until nearly 2 in the morning, printouts spread across every available surface, tracing the same pattern through account after account, until the shape of it became impossible to unsee. Small, staggered transfers, each one routed through shell entities with forgettable names, each one authorized within 48 hours of a large incoming deposit, each one bearing Gregory Wells's signature. 3 years, 6 accounts. By her rough calculation, working late into the night with a calculator and mounting dread, the total exceeded $4 million. She thought about calling Olivia. She thought about calling no one at all and simply burning the printouts in her kitchen sink. Instead, she called Bianca Romano. I need to show someone something, Shirley said, when Bianca picked up, voice thick with sleep. Before I take it to Mr. Pisani directly, I need to know I'm not imagining this. Bianca met her at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the office before sunrise, reading through the printouts with a stillness that gradually hardened into something grim. "You're not imagining this," Bianca said finally, setting down the pages. "I've suspected something for over a year." 2 employees filed anonymous complaints about Gregory's spending habits. Nothing concrete, just unease. Both complaints disappeared from the system within a week. Her jaw tightened. "I never had proof. You just handed me proof." "What do I do with it?" "You take it to Viviano. Directly. Not through Gregory, not through any channel that runs through his department." Bianca's eyes held hers, steady and serious. "And you should know, Shirley, the moment Gregory realizes you have this, you become a liability to him. A $4 million liability. Be careful." Shirley requested a private meeting with Viviano that same morning, and found herself, 20 minutes later, seated across from him in an office considerably more intimidating than she'd expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district, understated luxury in every careful detail, and Viviano himself watching her with the same focused, unhurried attention he'd shown at her desk the previous day. "You look like you haven't slept," he said, before she'd even fully sat down. "I haven't." She set the folder on his desk with hands that weren't entirely steady. "I found something last night. I think you need to see it before I say anything else." He opened the folder slowly, and Shirley watched his expression change page by page. The same careful stillness she'd noticed the day before, deepening now into something considerably colder as the scope of what she'd uncovered became clear. "6 accounts," he said quietly, when he finally looked up, "that I found. There could be more. The routing structure is deliberately obscured. Different shell names, staggered timing. Nothing that would trigger automatic flags in a standard audit. I only caught it because the meridian pattern happened to match something I'd half noticed months ago and never had reason to connect." "How much?" "Just over $4 million by my estimate. Possibly more, depending on accounts I haven't been able to fully trace yet." Viviano was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working, something dangerous moving behind his composed exterior. "Gregory Wells has worked for this company for 11 years, he said finally. "My father trusted him. I trusted him." His eyes lifted to hers. "You understand what you've just handed me?" "I understand. It's a lot of money." "It's considerably more than money." His voice had gone low, careful. "This company carries obligations beyond its balance sheet, Shirley. Obligations that require absolute discretion, absolute trust in the people managing our finances. If Gregory has been embezzling at this scale for 3 years, undetected, it means our entire internal audit structure has failed completely. And it means whoever eventually investigates this properly may uncover considerably more than simple theft." Something in his tone made Shirley's chest tighten with unease she couldn't quite name. "What do you mean?" Viviano studied her for a long moment, and Shirley watched him make a decision behind his eyes, weighing, calculating, deciding exactly how much truth she'd earned. "Nothing you need to concern yourself with yet," he said finally, though the careful evasion in his voice told her plainly there was considerably more beneath the surface than he was willing to share. "What matters now is handling this correctly, quietly, until I understand the full scope. Gregory already suspects I found something. He was watching my desk yesterday, like he expected me to hand him a resignation letter. Then we move faster than he expects." Viviano closed the folder, something resolved settling into his expression. "I want you working directly with me on this. Not through the accounting department, not through any channel Gregory has visibility into. Can you gather the remaining evidence discreetly, without drawing further attention?" "I can try." "I need more than trying, Shirley." His eyes held hers, steady and serious. "If Gregory realizes the extent of what you've uncovered, before I have enough evidence to move against him properly, he won't simply fire you quietly and hope the problem disappears. $4 million is enough motivation for a man to consider considerably more drastic options." The warning settled cold in Shirley's stomach, an unfamiliar fear threading through the adrenaline of the past 12 sleepless hours. "Are you saying I'm in danger?" Viviano's expression softened, something protective and entirely unguarded flickering behind his careful composure for the first time since she'd walked into his office. "I'm saying I intend to make certain you're not," he said quietly, "whatever that requires." Gregory found her an hour later, cornering her near the break room with a smile stretched thin over something considerably colder beneath. "Heard you had a private meeting with the boss this morning," he said, voice pleasant, eyes anything but. "Must be nice. Getting so much personal attention from Mr. Pisani lately." "It was about the Meridian account." "Was it?" Gregory stepped closer, close enough that Shirley had to fight the urge to retreat. "You know, Shirley, in 4 years, I've never once seen you climb this fast." Kneeling in mud for his mother, private meetings with the CEO, sudden urgent interest in accounts that were running perfectly smoothly before you started digging where you weren't asked. His smile didn't reach his eyes at all now. "I'd hate to see all that sudden attention go to your head. People who overreach in this company have a way of finding themselves unemployed rather quickly." "Is that a threat, Gregory?" "It's advice." He straightened his tie, the practiced charm sliding back into place like a mask. "Friendly advice from someone who's watched a lot of ambitious junior employees learn the hard way that some doors are better left closed." He walked away before she could respond, and Shirley stood frozen in the break room doorway, her pulse hammering, Viviano's warning echoing uncomfortably in her mind. $4 million is enough motivation for a man to consider considerably more drastic options. She returned to her desk with shaking hands, opening her email to continue the quiet, careful work of gathering evidence, and froze entirely at what greeted her inbox. A message sent from an internal account she didn't recognize, subject line blank, a single attachment waiting to be opened. She clicked it open with dread pooling cold in her stomach. Bank statements. Her own bank statements, ones she'd never shared with anyone, alongside a message typed in stark, deliberate black text. "Stop digging, or these numbers will start telling a very different story about where your sudden interest in the company's finances is really coming from." Shirley's hands shook so badly it took 3 attempts to forward the email to Viviano's private address. He called her office line within 90 seconds. "Don't respond to it," he said. No preamble, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Don't touch anything else on your work computer. Come up to my office, now." She found him standing at the window when she arrived, Matteo already present, hunched over a laptop with the particular focus of a man tracing a digital trail. "It's a scare tactic," Matteo said, without looking up. "The bank statements are real, but there's nothing incriminating in them. Just an attempt to make it look like there might be, if someone wanted to construct a story around it later. Whoever sent this wanted you rattled, not necessarily framed." "Not yet." "That's supposed to be reassuring? It's supposed to tell you Gregory's panicking." Matteo finally looked up, something grim in his expression. Careful, controlled men don't send threats from internal accounts they think can't be traced. He's rushing. Rushing men make mistakes. "He's already made one," Viviano said quietly, crossing from the window. "The account used to send this traces back to an IP address inside this building. 3rd floor, Gregory's own office." Shirley's stomach turned. He sent it himself, from his own desk. "Arrogance," Matteo said, "or desperation. Sometimes they look identical." Viviano's jaw was tight, something dangerous simmering beneath his controlled exterior as he studied Shirley across the room. "This changes things. I'd planned to move carefully, quietly, building a complete case before confronting him directly. That plan assumed he wouldn't escalate against you personally." "I'm fine," Shirley said, though her voice wavered slightly on the words. "You're not fine. You're frightened, and you have every right to be." Viviano crossed the room, stopping close enough that Shirley had to tilt her head to meet his eyes, something fierce and protective radiating off him that had nothing to do with corporate concern. I should have moved you out of his direct supervision the moment I saw those account discrepancies. That was my mistake, not yours. You couldn't have known he'd do this. I should have anticipated it regardless. His hand found her shoulder, brief and grounding. You're being reassigned. Effective immediately. Direct report to Bianca. Temporary desk on the executive floor. Away from any department Gregory has access to. Won't that make him more suspicious? Let him be suspicious. I'd rather he understand clearly that threatening my employees carries immediate consequences. Something cold entered Viviano's voice. Matteo, I want full financial forensics on every account tied to Gregory's authorization, going back 5 years instead of 3. If there's more buried, I want it found before he has time to destroy anything further. On it, Matteo was already gathering his laptop, though he paused at the door, glancing back with something almost amused, despite the tension in the room. For what it's worth, boss, I haven't seen you this focused on anything in longer than I can remember. He left before Viviano could respond, and the office fell quiet, Shirley suddenly, acutely aware of how close he still stood, his hand lingering a moment longer than strictly necessary before he stepped back. Thank you, she said softly, for taking this seriously. I half expected you to tell me I was overreacting. I would never dismiss a genuine threat against someone under my protection. Something flickered behind his eyes, careful and deliberate. Especially not you. The words hung between them, warmer and more personal than either of them had quite intended to acknowledge, and Shirley felt her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing at all to do with fear. Arthur Collins, the company's longtime auditor, found Shirley on the executive floor 2 days later, hovering near her temporary desk with visible anxiety, glancing over his shoulder as though expecting to be watched. I heard about the reassignment, he said quietly, once he'd confirmed no one else stood within earshot. I need to talk to you, somewhere private. They met that evening in an empty conference room, Arthur's hands trembling slightly as he spread a folder of his own across the table. Older documents, yellowed at the edges, dated years before Shirley had even joined the company. I've known about irregularities in Gregory's accounts for 2 years, Arthur admitted, voice thick with guilt. I flagged something during a routine audit, brought it to him directly, thinking it was a simple filing error. He explained it away smoothly enough that I let it go. His hands tightened. Then it happened again the following year, and I let that go too, because Gregory made it very clear what would happen to my position if I made a habit of questioning his numbers. You knew, Shirley said, something between anger and sympathy tightening her chest. For 2 years. I suspected. I never had proof. Not real proof. Not until whatever you found. Arthur's voice cracked. I have a daughter starting college next year. Shirley, I told myself the company could absorb a small discrepancy better than my family could absorb me losing this job. I've regretted that decision every single day since. What are you telling me this for now? Because I heard about the email. The threat. Arthur's jaw tightened with something like resolve. I won't let him hurt someone else the way I let my own silence hurt this company. I'm willing to testify, formally, about everything I noticed and everything Gregory said to keep me quiet. Shirley felt something shift in her chest, relief and gratitude tangling together with the exhaustion of the past several days. Thank you, Arthur. This matters. It really does. Just promise me you'll be careful. His eyes held hers, genuine worry beneath the guilt. I've watched Gregory operate for over a decade now. He's never physically threatened anyone before. Not that I've witnessed. But cornered men do things they wouldn't otherwise consider, and he's more cornered now than I've ever seen him. Shirley left the meeting with Arthur's statement carefully secured, hope threading cautiously through her exhaustion for the first time in days, until she reached the parking garage an hour later and found her car's windshield shattered, a single brick resting on the driver's seat amid the broken glass. Tucked beneath it, held down against the wind by the brick's weight, was a folded note. She unfolded it with shaking hands. Last warning. This isn't a game, Miss Curry. Viviano arrived at the parking garage within 15 minutes of Shirley's call. Matteo and two security personnel close behind him, his expression carrying a controlled fury Shirley hadn't yet seen from him in full. "You're not driving this home," he said, taking in the shattered windshield, the brick still resting on broken glass, the folded note now sealed carefully in an evidence bag Matteo had produced from seemingly nowhere. "You're not staying in your apartment tonight, either. Viviano, I have work in the morning. You have a stalker with knowledge of your car, your parking habits, and apparently enough resources to track your schedule closely enough to know exactly when you'd be alone in this garage." His jaw was tight, something raw and protective bleeding through his usual composure. "I'm not debating this. Where am I supposed to go?" "The estate," he said it simply, as though the answer were obvious. "I have security there that a threatening note left under a brick can't touch. My mother would be delighted for the company, and you'd be considerably safer than any hotel I could book on short notice." Shirley hesitated, exhaustion and fear warring against the strangeness of what he was suggesting. "That feels like a significant step." "It's a practical one." Something softened in his expression. "Please, Shirley, let me make sure you're safe tonight. We can discuss the rest of it once I know you're not sleeping somewhere Gregory's people could reach you again." She didn't have the strength left to argue. The Pisani estate rose from its gardens like something out of an Italian countryside painting transplanted whole into the Hudson Valley. Warm stone, ivy-draped walls, security discreet enough to be nearly invisible, except for the careful, professional way every guard's eyes tracked their arrival. Evelina met them in the entrance hall, still in her evening robe, her face lighting instantly at the sight of Shirley despite the late hour. "You've come to visit properly this time." She reached for Shirley's hands with genuine delight, though her expression shifted quickly to concern as she took in Shirley's shaken appearance, the faint tremor still working through her hands. "Oh dear, what's happened? Someone's threatening her, Mama." Viviano's voice carried none of the careful diplomacy he'd used with Shirley moments earlier. "She'll be staying here tonight, possibly longer, until we resolve it." "Good." Evelina's grip tightened, fierce despite her age. "This house has more locked doors and armed men than the entire island of Manhattan. You'll be safe here, dear, I promise you that." She insisted on personally showing Shirley to a guest room, chattering warmly the entire way about the estate's gardens, the wine cellar Viviano rarely used, the particular quiet of the house at night that she found considerably more peaceful than Rosewood's carefully monitored halls. "He hasn't brought anyone here before," Evelina said quietly, pausing at the guest room door, something knowing in her soft blue eyes. "Not since his father passed. You should know that, dear. Whatever's happening at that company of his, it's not the only reason you're here tonight." Shirley flushed, uncertain how to respond to something so directly, gently observed. "He's being kind. That's all this is." "Perhaps." Evelina's smile carried decades of quiet wisdom. "Or perhaps my son recognizes something rare when it finally walks into his life, and he's simply too guarded to say so plainly. Yet. Sleep well, dear. You're safe here." Shirley found Viviano alone on the estate's terrace an hour later, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion, drawn by the quiet murmur of his voice, speaking into a phone she recognized wasn't a standard business call. He ended it the moment he saw her, something careful entering his expression. "I thought you'd be asleep. I tried." She wrapped her arms around herself against the cool night air. "Every time I close my eyes, I see that brick on my seat. I'm sorry." He crossed the terrace, close enough now that she caught the low, steady warmth radiating off him despite the chill. "This is my fault. I should have moved faster to protect you the moment I understood how deep Gregory's fraud actually ran. You couldn't have predicted he'd escalate this quickly. I should have anticipated it regardless. I know exactly what men do when they feel cornered." Something dark flickered behind his eyes, gone before Shirley could fully examine it. "I have resources beyond what a standard corporate investigation typically allows, Shirley. I intend to use every one of them to make certain nothing else happens to you." What kind of resources? He was quiet for a long moment, something calculating behind his careful expression, weighing exactly how much truth this particular night deserved. My family's business interests extend somewhat beyond investment banking, he said finally, carefully. I've kept that side of things separate from the corporate world for a long time. But if Gregory Wells intends to threaten someone under my protection, I'm no longer inclined to keep those worlds quite so separate. Shirley studied him carefully, something uneasy threading through her exhaustion. What does that mean exactly? It means I have people who can find things a standard forensic accountant never could. His voice had gone quiet, deliberate. It means Gregory Wells picked a considerably more dangerous fight than he realizes. Before Shirley could press further, his phone buzzed sharply against the terrace table. Matteo, his name flashing urgent across the screen. Viviano answered immediately, and Shirley watched his expression shift from careful control to something colder, more focused, within seconds. "Say that again," he said, voice flat. A pause. Shirley's heart hammered, watching whatever news Matteo delivered land like a physical blow. "You're certain of the source." Another pause, longer this time. "Understood. I'll handle it personally in the morning." Viviano ended the call slowly, his jaw working, something dangerous and resolved settling into his expression as he turned back toward Shirley. "What is it?" she asked quietly. "What did he find?" "Gregory's embezzlement," Viviano said, his voice carefully controlled despite the fury simmering beneath it. "Isn't operating alone." Matteo traced part of the shell company structure back to an account with connections to a rival organization, one that's been trying to find leverage against my family's business for over a year. His eyes met hers, grave and unflinching. "This was never just corporate theft, Shirley. Gregory's been feeding information to people considerably more dangerous than a disgraced CFO facing prison time. And now that you're staying under my roof, tonight, you've just become considerably more valuable to them than you ever were as a junior bookkeeper." Shirley returned to Pisani Holdings the following morning with two of Viviano's security detail trailing at a discreet distance, her stomach tight with a dread that only deepened when she reached her temporary desk on the executive floor and found Bianca Romano waiting, her expression grim. "You need to see this before you go anywhere else today," Bianca said quietly, leading her toward a small conference room where a laptop sat open on the table. "HR received an anonymous tip this morning. Internal audit flagged unusual activity on your employee account." "My account?" "A transfer. $22,000 routed through your employee expense system 3 weeks ago, time-stamped to match your login credentials." Bianca's jaw tightened. "It's dated the same week you first flagged the Meridian discrepancy." Shirley's blood ran cold. "I never authorized any transfer. I've never even seen that amount of money in my account, let alone moved it anywhere." "I believe you. But the paper trail says otherwise. And it's convincing enough that if this reaches the board before we can counter it, it won't just discredit your findings against Gregory." Bianca's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "It'll make you look like the embezzler, and him look like the diligent supervisor who caught you. He's framing me. He's trying to." Bianca closed the laptop. "Viviano's already been informed. He wants you in his office immediately." Viviano was standing when she arrived, phone in hand. Matteo beside him poring over a second laptop with the same focused intensity Shirley remembered from the night of the shattered windshield. "Tell me you don't believe this," Shirley said, before either man could speak, her voice unsteady despite her best effort to keep it controlled. "Whatever that transfer shows, I had nothing to do with it." "I know." Viviano crossed the room, something fierce and immediate in his reassurance. "I've never once doubted that, Shirley. But I need you to understand what we're dealing with. Gregory didn't send that fabricated transfer to convince me. He sent it to create a paper trail he can use publicly, the moment he needs to discredit you in front of the board." "How do we prove it's fabricated?" "Digital forensics," Matteo said, not looking up from his screen. "Fabricated login timestamps leave traces if you know where to look." I'm cross-referencing the actual building access logs against the timestamp on that transfer. If Shirley's badge shows her somewhere else in the building, or not in the building at all, at the exact moment that transfer allegedly occurred, we have proof. And if it doesn't line up in my favor, it will, Viviano said, with a certainty that startled her. Because you didn't do this, and the truth leaves evidence, even when someone works hard to bury it. Mateo's fingers stilled on the keyboard. Got it. He turned the screen toward them. Badge access shows Shirley leaving the building at 6:47 that evening. The fraudulent transfer is timestamped 7:15. She wasn't even in the building when it supposedly happened. Relief crashed through Shirley so completely her knees nearly buckled, though the reprieve lasted barely a moment before Viviano's expression hardened into something colder. That's enough to protect you, he said. It's not enough to end this. Gregory's already shown he's willing to fabricate evidence and threaten physical harm. If we simply expose the framing attempt without exposing the full embezzlement network behind it, he'll have time to destroy whatever else connects him to the rival family funding this. Then what do? We move faster than he expects. Viviano's jaw was set, something resolved and dangerous settling into his expression. Mateo, pull everything Arthur's willing to testify to, everything Bianca's documented, every account you've traced. I want a complete case ready by tomorrow morning. And Gregory? Gregory, Viviano said quietly, doesn't get to know we're coming. The board meeting convened the following afternoon, called on short notice under the guise of a routine quarterly review, though Shirley could see, from her seat near the back of the room, the careful tension radiating from Viviano at the head of the table. Gregory arrived precisely on time, composed and confident, settling into his usual seat with the easy authority of a man who believed himself entirely secure. Before we begin quarterly reports, Viviano said, once the room had settled, I want to address an internal matter that requires the board's immediate attention. Gregory's expression flickered, something sharp and wary crossing his face, before he smoothed it into careful neutrality. Of course, what matter is that? An embezzlement scheme, Viviano said, without preamble, operating within this company for approximately 3 years, totaling in excess of $4 million, routed through shell accounts authorized under a single executive signature. Murmurs rippled around the table, board members exchanging startled glances. That's a serious accusation, Gregory said carefully, though Shirley noted the faint sheen of sweat beginning at his temple. Do you have evidence to support it? I do. Viviano nodded to Mateo, who began distributing folders around the table with quiet, deliberate precision. 6 years of financial records, cross-referenced authorization signatures, and testimony from Arthur Collins regarding irregularities he flagged and was subsequently pressured to ignore. Gregory's composure cracked visibly now, his eyes darting toward the door before returning to the folder in front of him. This is absurd. Someone's clearly fabricated. There's also, Viviano continued, his voice never rising, never wavering, an attempt made 3 days ago to frame Miss Curry for a fraudulent transfer, using access credentials falsified to implicate her in the very fraud she'd uncovered. Building access logs prove she wasn't even in the office at the time the transfer allegedly occurred. The room had gone entirely silent now, every eye fixed on Gregory, whose careful mask had finally, completely shattered. You have no idea what you're interfering with, Gregory said, his voice low and dangerous, entirely stripped of its usual charm. This isn't just about money, Viviano. You should have left this buried. Then explain it to me, Viviano said, his voice going ice cold. Explain exactly what I'm interfering with, Gregory. Right now, in front of this entire board. Gregory's jaw tightened, something calculating and desperate flickering behind his eyes as he glanced once more toward the door, weighing an option Shirley recognized, with sudden dread, as an exit rather than an explanation. You want the truth? Gregory's laugh carried no humor at all. Fine. The truth is, I was never working alone, and the people I answer to won't let this end quietly just because you caught me in a boardroom." He reached into his jacket. Shirley's heart lurched, and across the room she watched Matteo's hand move instinctively toward his own concealed weapon, Viviano's entire body shifting into something coiled and ready. Gregory's hand emerged not with a weapon, but with his phone, thumb already moving across the screen. "I'd think very carefully," he said, voice shaking now, "about how this meeting ends, Viviano. Because I've already sent a message that tells my associates exactly what happens if I don't walk out of this building within the next 10 minutes. The boardroom held its breath. Board members froze mid-motion, several exchanging alarmed glances, one woman near the far end reaching instinctively for her own phone before Matteo's sharp gesture stilled her. "You're bluffing," Viviano said, his voice remaining eerily calm despite the tension radiating from every corner of the room. "If your associates truly had leverage strong enough to guarantee your safe exit, you wouldn't be threatening a boardroom. You'd have already used it." Gregory's hand trembled slightly around his phone. "You don't know what you're dealing with." "I know precisely what I'm dealing with." Viviano's eyes never left him, cold and steady. "A rival organization has been funding your embezzlement in exchange for financial leverage against my family's business. That's not a mystery to me, Gregory. That's a mistake you made 3 weeks ago, when Matteo traced your shell accounts back to an entity my people have been watching for over a year." Gregory's composure fractured further, sweat now visible along his hairline. "Then you understand exactly how dangerous this is. Walk away from this, Viviano. Let me leave, and we forget this meeting happened. That's not how this ends." Viviano's voice hadn't risen once, though something lethal had entered it, quiet and absolute. "You threatened an employee under my direct protection. You fabricated evidence to destroy her reputation. You've spent 3 years stealing from a company my father built and funneling information to people who would gladly see everything I've built burned to the ground." He rose slowly from his chair. "You don't walk out of this building today, Gregory, not on your own terms." Security arrived through the boardroom's rear entrance with practiced, silent efficiency. Not Matteo's men, but Viviano's, arriving at a signal Shirley hadn't even noticed him give. Gregory's eyes darted wildly, phone still clutched in his shaking hand, and for one terrible, suspended moment, Shirley genuinely believed he might do something catastrophic. Then his shoulders sagged, all remaining fight visibly draining out of him as the security team closed the distance, and he set the phone down on the table with the resigned defeat of a man finally, completely cornered. "They'll come for you," he said quietly. To Viviano, as security moved to secure him. "The organization I've been feeding information to. They won't simply let this go because you've caught me." "Let them come," Viviano said, something dark and entirely unafraid in his voice. "I've survived considerably worse than a rival family testing my defenses." Gregory was led from the room in silence, the board members watching in stunned, uncertain quiet, and Shirley found herself shaking, adrenaline finally catching up with her, now that the immediate danger had passed. Viviano crossed to her the moment the door closed, kneeling beside her chair, his careful composure cracking entirely into raw concern. "Are you all right?" "I think so." Her voice wavered. "I've never watched someone almost detonate a boardroom before. It's not something I'd recommend." Something close to a laugh escaped him, exhausted and relieved all at once, and he reached for her hand without hesitation, holding it tightly enough that she felt the tremor still working through his own grip. "It's over," he murmured. "Whatever comes next with the rival family, whatever legal proceedings follow, the immediate threat to you is over." "Is it though?" Shirley studied his face carefully. "He said they wouldn't let this go." Viviano's jaw tightened, something he clearly hadn't intended to reveal so plainly flickering behind his eyes. "No," he admitted quietly. "It likely isn't entirely over, but I intend to make certain you're protected regardless of what comes next." Matteo found them an hour later, still in the now empty boardroom, Shirley finally steady enough to stand, Viviano reluctant to move more than a few feet from her side. "Gregory's cooperating," Matteo said. "Faster than I expected, honestly. He's already named his contact within the rival organization in exchange for a plea deal on the embezzlement charges." "Who?" Viviano said, and Shirley heard the particular stillness in his voice that meant the answer mattered considerably more than the question suggested. "Marcus Volkov," Matteo said. "Middle management within their organization. Not senior leadership, but connected enough to have orchestrated the shell account structure and fed Gregory instructions on which financial records to target." Something shifted behind Viviano's expression. Calculation replacing fury. "Volkov's people have been testing our perimeter for over a year," he said, half to himself. "I always assumed it was reconnaissance. I never suspected they'd found a foothold this deep inside my own company." "They didn't find it," Matteo said grimly. Gregory approached them, according to his statement, desperate for capital after some bad personal investments 3 years ago. He offered them information in exchange for funding his lifestyle, and it escalated from there. "Greed," Viviano said quietly. "Not strategy. Just an ordinary man's greed, exploited by people patient enough to turn it into leverage." "There's more," Matteo said, his expression carefully neutral in a way Shirley had learned. Over the past several days, usually meant considerably worse news was coming. Volkov's people know Shirley's name now. Gregory gave it up as part of his cooperation, trying to prove his usefulness to whoever's handling his legal situation. His eyes flicked briefly toward Shirley, before returning to Viviano. "If they were willing to fund a 3-year embezzlement scheme for leverage against your business, boss, I don't think they'll simply let go of a witness who could publicly expose the connection." Shirley's stomach dropped. "You're saying I'm still in danger, even with Gregory arrested?" "I'm saying," Matteo said carefully, "that the dangers changed shape, not disappeared." Viviano's hand found hers again, steady, despite the tension radiating through his entire body. "Then we adjust," he said, his voice carrying the same absolute certainty she'd heard in the boardroom minutes earlier. "Full security detail on Shirley, effective immediately. She stays at the estate until we understand exactly what Volkov's organization intends to do with what Gregory's given them." "That could be weeks," Shirley said. "Months, even." "Then it's weeks or months." His eyes held hers, something fierce and unwavering behind them. "I'm not gambling with your safety, Shirley. Not now. Not after everything you've uncovered, everything you've risked, simply because you were the only person in that lobby willing to kneel beside my mother when everyone else looked away." Matteo's phone buzzed sharply, cutting through the moment, and his expression darkened further as he read whatever message had just arrived. "Boss." His voice had gone tight, urgent. "Security just flagged unauthorized vehicles approaching the estate's outer perimeter. 2 cars, moving fast, no clearance on file." Viviano's grip on Shirley's hand tightened instantly, every trace of exhaustion vanishing from his expression, replaced by cold, focused readiness. "How many minutes out?" 4, Matteo said grimly. "Maybe less." "Get her to the safe room," Viviano said, already moving, his voice dropping into the same cold, commanding register Shirley remembered from the night Sophia's story had first taught her. "No," she corrected herself. That was a different story entirely, her exhausted mind tangling threads that didn't belong together. This was her own danger, her own night, and Viviano Pisani was already pulling her toward the estate's interior with a grip that brooked no argument. "I can help. You can help by staying alive." His voice didn't waver, though his hand trembled faintly around hers. "Matteo, perimeter positions, now." Matteo was already gone, shouting commands into his radio as security personnel materialized from every corner of the property, with disciplined, practiced speed. Evelina appeared in the hallway, alarm crossing her face at the sight of her son's expression. "Viviano. Stay with Shirley, Mama. Both of you. Safe room, now." He pressed a brief kiss to his mother's forehead before turning back to Shirley. Something raw, passing behind his eyes. I need you safe, please. She let him lead her toward the reinforced room she hadn't known existed until Evelina gently guided her through its door, the older woman's hand steady on her shoulder despite the chaos unfolding beyond the walls. He'll be fine, Evelina said, settling beside her as the door sealed. I've watched that boy survive considerably worse than 2 cars full of overconfident men. How can you be so calm? Because panic never once helped anyone I love come home safely. Evelina's hand found hers, warm and steady. You'll learn that too, dear, if you intend to stay in this family's orbit much longer. The confrontation outside lasted less than 10 minutes. Viviano's security team intercepted the vehicles a quarter mile from the main gate, and whatever exchange followed ended not in gunfire, but in a tense standoff that dissolved the moment Volkov's men realized the full weight of Pisani's security they'd underestimated. The cars retreated as quickly as they'd arrived, no shots fired, though the message had clearly been delivered regardless. We know where she is. We know who matters to you now. Viviano returned to the safe room, considerably grimmer than he'd left it, though relief flooded his expression the moment he saw Shirley unharmed. They're gone, he said, for tonight. But this confirms what Matteo suspected. Volkov's organization intends to use you as leverage, whether or not Gregory's cooperation gives them anything concrete to work with. Then what happens now? Now, Viviano said, settling heavily into the chair across from her, exhaustion finally breaking through his controlled exterior. I make certain they understand precisely how costly that strategy will become for them. The weeks that followed unfolded with a careful, deliberate rhythm. Security escorts, quiet negotiations Shirley wasn't privy to the details of, and a gradual, cautious return to something resembling normal life, as Viviano's organization made unmistakably clear, through channels Shirley didn't ask too many questions about, that threatening her carried consequences no rival family wanted to bear. Gregory's trial proceeded quietly, his plea deal securing considerably reduced charges in exchange for full cooperation, though the financial fraud alone guaranteed him years behind bars. Arthur Collins testified with the quiet, guilty resolve he'd promised, his own culpability acknowledged, but ultimately overshadowed by his cooperation in exposing the full scope of the scheme. Shirley returned to Pisani Holdings on a bright Tuesday morning, considerably more settled than she'd felt in weeks, and found a company-wide meeting already scheduled for that afternoon. She hadn't expected to be the subject of it. Effective today, Viviano announced, standing before the assembled staff in the same lobby where mud had once dripped onto marble floors while executives laughed. Shirley Curry is being promoted to Chief Financial Analyst, reporting directly to the executive office. Murmurs rippled through the gathered employees, several exchanging glances of unmasked surprise. For 5 years, Viviano continued, his eyes finding Shirley's across the room, her work has quietly protected this company from losses her supervisor claimed credit for. Her diligence uncovered a fraud scheme that could have cost considerably more than $4 million if left unaddressed. And her character, kneeling beside a stranger in this very lobby when every other person in this building chose to look away, reflects precisely the values I intend this company to represent going forward. Applause rose slowly, then fully. Executives who'd once laughed, now watching Shirley with expressions caught somewhere between shame and grudging respect. Bianca caught her eye from across the room, beaming. Olivia, near the back, was openly crying. Even Arthur offered a small, grateful nod. Shirley found herself unable to speak for a long moment. 5 years of quiet, uncredited work finally, publicly acknowledged in front of the entire company that had so consistently overlooked her. Thank you, she managed finally, her voice thick with emotion she'd carefully suppressed for far too long. I've always believed good work should speak for itself. I'm grateful someone finally listened. Ippolina found her afterward, in the quiet of the executive floor, a knowing smile already in place. You should have seen your face up there, Evelina said, settling into the chair beside Shirley's new desk with visible delight. absolutely stunned, as though 5 years of excellence, surprising an entire room, was somehow unexpected. It's strange, being seen after so long invisible. Shirley managed a small laugh. I'm not entirely sure how to hold it yet. You'll learn. Evelina patted her hand warmly. I've watched my son struggle with the exact same thing, you know. Being genuinely seen, rather than simply respected or feared. It takes practice, being known instead of merely observed. Is that what this is? Being known? I think, Evelina said, something gentle and knowing in her soft blue eyes, that my son has been trying to tell you exactly that for weeks now, dear. In every careful, protective, entirely unsubtle way, a guarded man knows how to show it. She rose slowly, patting Shirley's shoulder once more. Perhaps it's time someone finally said it plainly instead. She left with a knowing smile, and Shirley sat alone at her new desk for a long moment, heart hammering with something considerably warmer than the residual fear of the past several weeks, until Viviano appeared in her doorway, having clearly overheard at least the tail end of his mother's parting words. She's not wrong, he said quietly, stepping inside and closing the door behind him, though I suspect she'd prefer I found my own words, rather than borrowing her timing. Viviano, I've spent 5 years watching this company from a careful, guarded distance, he said, crossing the room slowly, trusting executives who betrayed that trust, keeping everyone at arm's length, because closeness has always felt like vulnerability I couldn't afford. His eyes held hers, unguarded now in a way she'd never quite seen from him before. Then, a mud-streaked stranger walked into my lobby, and the one person who knelt beside her without hesitation turned out to be someone I couldn't stop thinking about for a single day since. Shirley's breath caught, her heart hammering as he closed the remaining distance between them. What are you saying? I'm saying, he murmured, close enough now that she could see the vulnerability plainly written across his usually careful expression, that I love you, Shirley Curry. Not for the fraud you exposed, not for the promotion you've more than earned, for exactly who you are, the woman who helps strangers without ever checking who might be watching. Shirley stared up at him. 5 years of quiet invisibility and 3 weeks of danger and revelation, all colliding at once into a single, breathless moment. You love me, she repeated softly, testing the words. Completely. His hand rose to cup her face, gentle, despite the strength she'd watched him wield with such lethal precision in that boardroom weeks earlier. I understand this began under circumstances that were, at best, entirely unromantic. A fraud investigation, death threats, my mother's memory failing badly enough that she wandered lost through Central Park. His mouth curved, something rueful and warm in the expression. It's not the courtship most women dream of. I've never particularly cared for the dreams other women had. Shirley managed a small, unsteady laugh. I think I'd rather have this. All of it. Even the parts that terrified me. Even the safe rooms and the shattered windshields. Especially those. Her hand found his where it rested against her cheek. Because you were beside me for every single one of them. That's not nothing, Viviano. That's not something I take lightly. Something in his expression cracked entirely open, the last careful wall between them dissolving as he leaned down and kissed her. Slow, certain, 5 years of loneliness on her part, and considerably longer on his finally, quietly finding an answer neither of them had expected in a mud-streaked lobby weeks earlier. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Shirley found herself laughing softly against his chest. Your mother is going to be unbearably smug about this. She's already unbearably smug. I heard her tell Matteo this morning that she'd known we belonged together from the very first day, before either of us had exchanged a single word beyond hello. She wasn't entirely wrong. No, Viviano admitted, pressing a kiss to her forehead. She very rarely is. The following spring brought considerably gentler news than the winter that had preceded it. Pisani Holdings had rebuilt its executive structure entirely in the months since Gregory's arrest. Bianca stepping into an expanded oversight role, Shirley's chief financial analyst position evolving into something closer to a full partnership as Viviano increasingly trusted her judgment across every aspect of the legitimate business. The Volkov organization, faced with mounting legal exposure from Gregory's testimony and a Pisani security response considerably more thorough than they'd anticipated, had quietly withdrawn their interest in pursuing further leverage. A fragile peace, but a peace nonetheless. Evelina's dementia continued its slow, uneven progression, though she'd stopped escaping Rosewood quite so often since Viviano had begun bringing her to the estate for extended weekend visits, giving her the ordinary freedoms she'd craved, without the danger of wandering alone through city streets. She was there, in fact, on the particular Saturday afternoon Viviano chose for his proposal, though Shirley wouldn't learn until considerably later exactly how much planning had gone into the seemingly casual invitation to walk through the estate's gardens together. "It's beautiful out here today," Shirley said, admiring the roses climbing along the garden's old stone wall, unaware of Evelina watching discreetly from the terrace with barely contained excitement. "It is." Viviano's voice carried something careful, deliberate, that made Shirley glance toward him with sudden curiosity. "I wanted to bring you here specifically. This garden was my mother's favorite place. Growing up, my father proposed to her exactly here, 40 years ago." Shirley's breath caught. "Viviano. I've spent months now," he continued, reaching into his jacket with hands that, for the first time since she'd known him, trembled visibly, trying to find adequate words for everything you've given this family. "My mother, who finally found someone who saw her as a person instead of an inconvenience. This company, which you saved from a fraud that could have cost considerably more than money." He knelt slowly, ring box open, and Shirley's hand flew to her mouth. "And me, a man who genuinely believed love made him vulnerable, until you proved, again and again, that it simply made him better. Viviano, marry me, Shirley Curry. Not because you saved my mother's dignity in that lobby, though I'll be grateful for that moment every day of my life. Because you've become the single most important person in a world I once believed I had to guard alone." Shirley's eyes filled with tears, laughter bubbling up through the emotion as she pulled him upright before he'd even finished the question, answering him with a kiss instead of words, though the answer followed a moment later, breathless and certain. "Yes. Obviously yes, you impossible romantic man." Behind them, Evelina's delighted applause rang out from the terrace, entirely unsubtle about having watched the entire proposal unfold. "I told you he'd finally get around to it properly," she called, hurrying down the garden path with considerably more energy than her age typically allowed. 40 years late for tradition, but the roses forgave him, I'm sure. They married the following autumn, in that same garden, beneath an arch of the very roses that had witnessed both proposals across 2 generations of the Pisani family. Bianca stood as Shirley's maid of honor, Matteo as Viviano's best man, with a toast so dryly funny it left half the guests in tears of laughter. Olivia cried through the entire ceremony, unashamedly. Arthur Collins, invited despite his role in the scandal that had nearly cost Shirley everything, sat quietly near the back, grateful simply to witness the ending his silence had once nearly prevented. Evelina, seated in the front row in her finest silver dress, watched her son take Shirley's hands with an expression of complete, radiant peace, the particular contentment of a woman who'd wandered lost through Central Park on an ordinary rainy afternoon and, quite by accident, walked her way into finding her son a family he hadn't known he was missing. "You know," she told Shirley later, during the reception, pulling her aside with the same gentle, knowing warmth she'd shown from their very first conversation in that mud-streaked lobby. "I've thought about that day often. How different everything might have turned out if you'd simply stayed at your desk like everyone else." "I could never have stayed at my desk," Shirley said softly. "Not with you standing there, needing help nobody else would offer. That's precisely my point, dear." Evelina squeezed her hand, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Kindness isn't calculated. It doesn't weigh costs and benefits before deciding whether someone deserves help. You simply saw a person in need, and you knelt down. Her smile widened, warm and complete. That single, uncalculated moment built this entire family. Shirley, my son's happiness. This wedding. Everything good that's followed since. Across the reception, Viviano caught Shirley's eye, raising his glass in a silent, private toast that needed no further words between them. Shirley smiled back, 5 years of invisibility finally, completely behind her, and let herself believe, fully and without reservation, that some kindnesses really did change everything. If Shirley's kindness earning her the family she deserved got you, hit subscribe for more. Comment where you're watching from tonight. Type kindness wins below if this one stayed with you.